Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ratliff Mandolins Weekly Production Diary, where I, Audie Ratliff, share with you all of the happenings around the Ratliff Mandolin Workshop this week. It is about midday Monday, and the big news right now is that this past weekend, the computer that I used to load these videos up to YouTube blew up on Saturday, and so this morning I loaded it up and took it to town to a computer repair guy, and hopefully it will be fixed in a day or two and I won't have any issues loading this video up to YouTube this weekend. So we'll see how that works. As far as the workflow around the shop goes, if you've been following the episode, you know that we're right in the middle of a batch of 10 mandolins, gluing the backs on those 10 and gluing the binding on the back on some of those mandolins. And if you watched last week's episode, I fear that this week's episode will be pretty much a boring repeat of last week's episode. So I don't know exactly what all we're going to have for this week's episode, but I'm going to keep the camera close by and take some shots of whatever seems interesting. And until then, I'm going to go in the big room and pick up where I left off last week, which is binding on the back of mandolin number 1, and then work my way back down that line and get the rest of those backs glued on if possible. In the last couple of episodes, I've had a couple of people in the comment section ask me about gouges. One fellow wanted to know where did I shop for them at, and somebody else made a comment that they would like to see a little bit more about how you sharpen a gouge. And so I thought I would share that information with you now. Where I shop for them at is wherever I can find them. I bought new ones from, say, Woodcraft. I bought some off of eBay. I bought some at yard sales. Antique stores is a good place to find older tools, hand tools like that. And I've had friends just bring them in and say, here, I found this in Dad's garage, sort of thing. So they come anywhere, but you can still buy them brand new from Woodcraft or any of those places like that. Now, as far as sharpening them goes, let me first of all make a recommendation to you. If you own a wood shop and you do hand carving sort of thing, is this book right here. It is the Complete Guide to Sharpening. It was written by a fellow named Leonard Lee, and apparently he's the owner of Veritas Tools and Lee Valley Tools. And it's a very, very, very good book. It has sections, entire chapters devoted to things like the physics of severing wood fibers, and it talks about the different kinds of stones and the metal in the blades. It's got a chapter on how to sharpen chisels, how to sharpen planes, another chapter on entire chapter on just knives, an entire chapter on carving tools, turning tools, scrapers, handsaws, axes, power saw blades, drill bits. It's got a chapter on peripheral milling cutters. So this is the Bible of sharpening things. And if you've got a wood shop and you have chisels, gouges, drill bits, or anything like that, I highly recommend, if you can find a copy of this book. Its the exact title is The Complete Guide to Sharpening. Again, the author is Leonard Lee, and it's put out by Taunton Books, Taunton. And I'll tell you what, I've read it cover to cover at least twice and went back and referenced it several times. It is a good book for you. Now, let's move on to sharpening. First of all, let me describe the difference between a chisel and a gouge. A chisel has a flat blade across, just the blade is flat, and a gouge is curved, more like a spoon or something. So let me briefly discuss chisels. If you're going to sharpen a chisel, it sharpens from one side of the blade only, And there's all sorts of things that you can buy or make. I sharpened chisels for a while on just triangle blocks that I had cut with the degrees on them. This is a 20 degree one, this is a 25 degree, and I would just lay the chisel this way and sharpen. Let me discuss how to sharpen. I have some diamond plate stones. I got these from Amazon. There's 2 different grits on each side. This one's 150 to 600, 240 to 800, 400 to 1000. And so you can use any of these tricks like this right here. Take them out of the plastic. Boom. After I get to 1000 grit, I have a piece of 2000 grit glued to a piece of glass, actually, with contact cement, and that's an awfully handy thing to use. And then after that, I have a piece of red oak with that polishing rouge put all over it, and that puts the final on it. Now the trick is to keep your blade at the same angle all the time, and that's what these things do. This is a store-bought jig that you put the chisel in. Got a little roller on the bottom. Once it's all set up, it really can't go anywhere. It rolls a lot easier and better than it does with just the blocks. That's a chisel. Now let's discuss gouges. Gouges, again, have the entire tool surface is curved instead of flat, and you have 2 different ways of sharpening the gouge, and I'll try to hold this over here so that and get close up so that you can see it. But gouges can be sharpened on the inside of the gouge or on the outside. One of them, this one is called an incanal. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's spelled C-A-N-N-E-L. So I think that's canal, incanal, and out canal. Sharpened either on the inside or the outside. Now, sharpening on the outside is kind of easy. And I use tricks like this right here. I have these little circles, pieces of pipe. This looks like actually a piece of a bearing race or something is what this looks like. They're all homemade. I've drilled and tapped them. These have actual handles, screws with handles on them, and this is just a 1/4 nut. But for the out canals, you can just slip these things right down in here. Do that right there. Tighten everything down. And then you can use your stones here. Set your angles. And you set your angles by how far up and down this is set. Every time you move it closer or farther away, it changes the angle. And then you just run it on your stone. Run it all the way down through all of the grits, even down to the polishing thing. See? And by golly, you can do a really good job on an out canal with the same basic skill sets and tools and things as you do on a chisel. The end canals, they get a little trickier. Now, sometimes you can just turn, even in the same things, in the same jigs, you can just turn them over. Instead of running them this way, you can run them this way. Set your angles. And then I keep an entire collection of different sizes of PVC pipes and everything to kind of match the different radiuses of these blades. And then I will just take a piece of wet or dry sandpaper and just do that right there until I'm happy with the everything. Work my way down through the grits just like that. A couple of specialty things that I've got here are, this is a homemade thing, but it's just a block of wood with holes in it and cut at certain angles, and I use it specifically for this favorite little out canal chisel to do that with. Stick that all the way through and lock her all down and everything, and that one lets me set this one very, very finely and without very many mistakes at all. This is another one that will run on a pipe. So I've got all kinds of little tricks. Most of it's just homemade things. This is a just a block of wood that's cut specifically for these two tools. Actually fits right down in there. And then on the back side, this one fits. And I can run that right there. It holds all that at a set angle as I try to sharpen those two tiny chisels, actually, rather than a gouge. But that's basically it. I use these little tricks right here for gouges an awful lot. The inside and the out canals, you know. So here's a special one that I built for. I made this thing to help me with the 15th fret cross pieces, and it's a piece of a file. It's just a round chainsaw file, actually, that I bent that neck in, and then it fits in this. And I wrap the paper around a 1/2-inch bar of steel, the sandpaper. I'll wrap it around there. And then this thing has a groove cut in it. And I found that this thing, it really works a lot better than the other stuff because it don't rock and roll back and forth. And you can just do that right there. And that sharpens that little rascal up just as slick as a ribbon. So hopefully that will answer some of your questions. Here's another trick I thought about. When you're setting the tool and you're setting your angles and you're setting, how far do I need to go before I lock this thing in, you can always take a magic marker, a Sharpie or whatever, and just mark the blade, and then run it a little bit, and then just take a quick look at it, and you can tell exactly where you're hitting and where you're not. So that might help you along the way. Just mark your blade with a magic marker, and then take a look, and you can see exactly what you're doing. Hope some of that information will help. In addition to the questions about the gouges, I've also been asked about the differences in procedure between what I do and the way it's described in the Roger Siminoff book. And I have to say that I can't say enough good about this book. As you can see, I have a first edition bought in 1977, very well worn, many times read, and I just, as the old saying goes, I wouldn't trade this book for the world. And so I built many mandolins with this book. I will have to admit that I don't really do too many of the procedures like this book. Things have kind of morphed and developed over the years. I had a bunch of employees at one time, and we were doing 40 mandolins at a whack, or 50 or 60 instead of one. And so I spent a lot of time trying to streamline things and build jigs and stuff like that, so that we could do repeatable pieces and parts, all consistently of the same quality. And so over the years, I've kind of gotten away from some of these procedures and developed my own. One of the things that I was specifically asked about is when I'm wrapping the binding here, why don't I use that cloth tape or maybe a rubber strap? And the reason is the cloth tape seems to work real good on guitars and that sort of thing. But when you're in these little tiny areas here, if you use the cloth tape, which usually about the thinnest you can get, that stuff is, say, 1/4 of an inch. When you pull it, that 1/4 of an inch just covers up and you can't really see what you're trying to glue. And so it covers up the joint, and you really have no idea if you pull it in there far enough or tight enough. So I eventually went to using this masonry string, which I buy at one of the big box stores, and that way you can, it doesn't take up a big wide area on that piece of binding. In these tight areas right here, you can see whether you've pulled the two pieces of binding together or not, especially on these tips here. Lots of times you're wanting to put them together like this, and I'll wrap this way and then this way and then this way, and sort of crisscross these things, and I can watch it as it's going together, and I can tell that I've got a good joint or a bad joint, and I cannot do that with cloth tape. So that's why I use the string. And another question that I got was, why don't I use violin spool clamps instead of the prop bar deck to glue things together? And I guess one of the big reasons is I've got the prop bar deck. This big table was here, believe it or not, when I bought this building. I added the deck and the supports here to make it a prop bar deck, but this is a huge 4x8 great table. And like I said earlier, in this building's life, we were building 50 or 60 instead of 10 at a time, and every one of these little bins were just full of mandolin parts being glued up and everything. So the means of a go bar deck, a nice one, are here, and so that's why one of the reasons that I use the go bar deck instead of the violin spool clamps, these things. Another big reason is if you've got two pieces glued together with the go bar deck, you can get in here and clean out your glue squeeze out pretty easily. But if you're using nothing but violin spool clamps, you can't get there to clean out the glue very good because the clamp is in the way. So that is why I use this thing. And I have glued all kinds of stuff with this go bar deck, broken chairs, and you have no idea what a handy tool this is. So I think that pretty much takes care of the questions and the comments that I wanted to talk about in this episode. You got any more questions? Feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Comments, I appreciate them. Enjoy reading them and responding to them and all like that. So please keep that up. I think it's, before we close this video out, I'll give you an update on the batch status. This has been one of those crazy weeks, and I didn't get a whole lot done, but I did get some significant things done. As you know, Monday I took the computer off. It wasn't working, and I glued the back on mandolin number 4. Those are basically the two big significant things that I did on Monday. On Tuesday, I glued the last piece of binding on mandolin number 1, the back. That is the oval hole mandolin that we have in this batch. And I took mandolin number 4 out of the prop bar decks and cleaned the back up and trimmed all of the excess and all like that, and started getting it ready to do the back binding on it as well. It's going to be a master model with 3-ply binding, and so I cut a double edge for that stuff. It's very time consuming, takes a long time. It's all done by hand. And so I did that for the rest of the day on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I was able to work on mandolin number 4 until about 11, and then we had errand day in town, and as it turned out, we left at 11 and didn't get back till 6:30. I think by the time it was all said and done, Bonnie counted 16 different stops. Of grocery stores, banks, post offices, picking the computer up. I don't know what all, but it was 16 stops by the time we were done. And so there wasn't a whole lot of work done on Wednesday. Thursday, I finally got the first piece of binding on the back of mandolin number 4 and mandolin number 1, which I hadn't touched since earlier in the week. I took all the string off and cleaned that up and sanded off the excess glue and just got it ready pretty much for the next step, which would be putting the fretboard on, by the way. But that took most of the day, and I got it all sanded down back and sides to about 100 grit. And so now it is Friday morning, and I'm going to go in there and tackle mandolin number 4 again, and then move my way back down to catch the next job that's coming up. So, having said all that, again, thank you so very much for sticking with me to the end. Be sure and leave me a comment again, and we'll look for you in the next episode of the Ratliff Mandolins, a weekly production diary. Hope to see you then.